walk through the basic supplies that you're going to need in order to create an indigo dye vat and dye all of the things that your heart desires. The first thing is obviously that you're going to need some indigo. My favorite way to introduce students to basic indigo dyeing is through this Jacquard Indigo Dye Starter Kit. Inside this kit, you find all of the basics that you're going to need to do one 5-gallon bucket worth of dye. That's up to about 15 yards of fabric, or about 10 to 15 dish towels, a couple of curtains, maybe a queen or king duvet coverlet. If you bought your supply kit directly from me, then you have this exact indigo dye kit in your box. If you can't find this Jacquard Indigo Dye Kit, I'm going to show you everything that's inside it so you can try to access those ingredients and supplies separately. We're going to start with the indigo itself. For a 5-gallon bucket, we're going to use 20 grams of pre-reduced indigo. It's really nice that it's already reduced to this point where it's just a fine blue crystal. It's insoluble in water at this point, so we need a couple other chemicals that are included in the kit to make the process happen. The first is soda ash, 100 grams of soda ash or sodium carbonate. This helps to raise the pH of the water to help the process go smoother. The next chemical that's included in the kit that we need to use is 50 grams of sodium hydrosulfite or thiourea dioxide. This is an oxygen sequester, and we'll talk about this more when I tell you about the beautiful chemical process involved with indigo dyeing. Also within your kit, you're going to find a couple sets of rubber bands. There's littler ones and bigger ones. When I tell you about the shibori dyeing techniques, I'll show you how to use both of those to create different patterns. For your shibori techniques, you're also going to want some wooden supplies. Wooden clothespins are one of my favorite shibori and indigo dyeing supplies, so I've included a set for you. You'll find some wooden blocks to use for pattern blocking. There's also a couple little popsicle sticks that also help with your folding and binding techniques. In addition to the basic chemicals and tying and binding supplies, you're going to need a bucket to create your dye vat. I use a 5-gallon bucket with a lid. It's important that it has a lid or some other way to make it airtight for when the dye is processing. If you don't have a 5-gallon bucket on hand, you can consider using a plastic storage box that has a lid. You probably have something in your pantry or your storage shed that you could clear out to use for your dyeing and then use again later. If you're going to dye inside the house, I recommend that you use a plastic tablecloth or drop cloth, something to cover your table and maybe even your floors, depending on where it is that you're dyeing. This is unnecessary if you're dyeing outside or on a surface that you don't worry about getting dyed. There is one pair of gloves included in the indigo dye supply kit. You may find that you want an additional pair of gloves, and I recommend if you're going to do some indigo dyeing beyond this one time, that you find just an inexpensive pair of rubber kitchen or cleaning gloves that you can use over and over again, rather than disposing of your nitrile or latex gloves every time. You're also going to need a stir stick for mixing up your dye vat. This can be something like a paint stir stick that's extra long. You could even go get a stick from outside in your yard or garden. Just find something that's long enough to reach to the bottom of whatever container you're using to mix your dye vat. And this is totally optional, but you may want to keep an extra bucket or bowl for cold water on hand that you can use as you're preparing to dye each of your pieces. The last thing that you're going to need that's optional but helpful is some sort of rope or cord that you can use as a dry line. Once we've rinsed all of our indigo dyed pieces, it's really helpful to be able to dry them outside in the sunshine. In my experience, that first sun dry is really helpful in setting the dye for the future. If you don't have a dry line or you don't have outside space, or you're doing this in the middle of winter, you can use an indoor drying rack. You could even really make sure your pieces are rinsed well and just hang them over the back of chairs in your kitchen. Of course, beyond all of the chemicals and the bucket and the gloves and the tools, you're going to need something to dye. If you bought your supply kit from me, then you already have 10 pre-washed 100% cotton flour sackcloth towels. These are what's hanging behind me. They're my very favorite cotton dish towels. They're beautiful once they're dyed, and as you wash them, they actually get softer and more absorbent over time. You don't have to just dye kitchen towels though. You can dye clothing, bedding, linens, even rugs and curtains and pillows, anything that is a natural fiber. Being a natural dye, indigo loves natural fibers like cotton, linen, bamboo, wool, silk, hemp, and flax. This is the point where some of you are thinking, but can I dye something that's like 50% cotton and 50% polyester? I always say you might as well go for it. However, the indigo is only going to dye the natural fibers. So it will dye maybe 50% less powerfully, or depending on how the fabric is formulated, it may dye a little bit more splotchy than if it was a full natural fabric. The other thing I need to quickly mention before we get started dyeing is that we are working with dye here. It is not a washable dye, so you want to make sure that you're wearing clothes that you don't mind getting a little blue just in case that happens. Okay, friends, do you have everything that you need? Let's get started.